Welcome back. Well, we're still keeping our focus on that. Remember that food import policy? Yes, it's still very much on the front burner. We've got two gentlemen here with us to give us their perspectives on that matter. On my immediate right, we've got Mr. Timothy Olawale, who is the Director General of Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. Thank you for coming this morning, sir.
It's my pleasure.
We also do have Mr. Dapo Oyemumi, who is the CEO, Center for Law and Business. Good to see you again, sir.
Good morning. Thank you. That was a pleasure.
All right. Well, Mr. Lawal, I know that NECA has spoken up about this. They think that there would be loss of jobs. But before we come to that, let me get Mr. Oyemumi's perspective on the legal aspect of this. The question, some think, well, if you look through the CBN Act, and for those who think they're not exactly sure if the president can advise the CBN and how should he do it? Is he going against the CBN Act? From your perspective, from those laws which you've seen, what do you think?
Well, definitely the CBN Act gives the Central Bank of Nigeria independence. In fact, in subsection 3 of section 1 of the CBN Act, it says in the performance of its duties is supposed to be independent. So from that perspective, if it's an independent institution, then the way it carries out its functions must reflect that independence. The decisions must be its own decisions after going through its own processes of making those decisions. So from that perspective, you want to say, yes, the federal government, or rather the president, should not give a directive to the Central Bank of Nigeria. That's on the face of it, there's no doubt. However, it would have been useful if we had received or had any feedback or response from the Central Bank of Nigeria itself as to the directive. And sometimes, you know, human relations, governance, and these things is not a precise science. So it's not, it must go this way and all that. If there's an objective that's to be achieved, and that objective seems laudable, then perhaps if a process is started that's not the way it's supposed to be, then you can go back and look at it and say, okay, we have been told this by the president, and that means that is his thinking, the direction in which he's thinking. Then let's look at it ourselves in the central bank and see whether that's the way to go, and then we can then decide or advise the president that, well, we think this is agreeable, it's a good policy, we should go with it, or we should tinker it, or we should do this. So coming back to your question, on the face of it, it looks as if, yes, it's independent. But again, whether the independence of an institution is being eroded cannot be determined by one instance. You must see a consistent breach of that independence to say that the independence of this institution is being eroded. So I'm not going to take a quick or categorical statement and say, oh, the independence has been eroded. Maybe the process is not exactly the same way. The intention, we should look at the intention, because sometimes, you know, we say we walk to the answer. You know, there's an objective you want to achieve, and then you work towards achieving that objective. But the CBN Act says the CBN must be independent in the way it carries out its functions.
Before you go,
yes.
What would indicate to you, me, that the independence of the CBN has been eroded? From what you've said now, it would seem like there is no document from the presidency to the CBN.
There's no, well, on the face of it, that's why I said it would have been useful if there has been a response from the CBN itself. Because all we've heard, it's just in the news. Yeah, and again, the word directive, I'm not so sure the president said, I hereby direct the CBN to do this.
Okay, well,
you understand? So it's, yes, but it's the media that says has been directed. Sorry?
Doesn't it sound the same? I have directed.
No, it didn't say I have directed.
Apparently, the quote from the
if only we can look at it, it just says, please don't give a cent to anybody who wants to import money.
We'll get that.
So in the interpretation, we now said the president has directed.
Speaking about the intention, Mr. Lawale, isn't the intention, do you think it's a laudable one or not?
Well, the president's directive, because that's the way I see it, because he said I've directed or instructed the CBN governor to do this. So, however, when you look at the aim of that directive, it meant well. In other words, it's a desirable destination. But that journey, the commencement of that journey is ill-timed. In other words, there are times you have good intention, but the appropriateness of the timing is questionable. And why did I say so? In a country where you assume that you have reached or attained full sufficiency, and we all know that food inflation is very high in this country. Besides that, there was no clear-cut definition of what he meant by food. Is it processed food? Are they food that serves as feeders into our industries or factories or production processes, which will affect the capacity of these production processes? Are they foods that are in the raw form that are consumed by the generality of Nigeria? Because each category has its own implications. So, overall, because of the aim or the objective that he intends to achieve, which was, according to the statement, to conserve foreign exchange, it makes sense, it's laudable. However, you don't just jump into the implementation of such policy without sitting down and doing due diligence. Is it the right time to do this? Is it going to rupture or disrupt other processes? Is it even going to cause more problem than the one you are trying to solve? And if I may go further, it's just the same principle that makes federal government not to stop the importation of fuel products, because it's also desirable. As a matter of fact, it's the biggest way that foreign exchange can be conserved in our country today. With the trillions of naira that we expend on fuel importation, why is it that government is hesitant in stopping the ban on importation of fuel?
I think the new NNPC DG, I read somewhere where he was saying that he's given a time for which we will stop the importation of products.
That is the key word, the timing. In other words, you don't just rush into it and say you are stopping the importation of fuel. The question is, do you have capacity, if you are implementing immediately, to actually satisfy local consumption? There is no capacity. The same way with the issue of food sufficiency. As it is today, we don't have the capacity. So if you just do a wholesome withdrawal of foreign exchange, it's going to have consequences, chains of consequences, as it were today, in several aspects of businesses as well as the value chain of agriculture.
Right. Now, I'd like us to go back to that. Yeah. This is not an ambush, by the way, but let's take a look at what Mr. Garba Shehu said. I mean, that spiraled into this whole conversation. So this is what he said. President Muhammadu Buhari on Tuesday disclosed that he has directed the Central Bank of Nigeria to stop providing foreign exchange. Is that not directive enough for you? I mean,
well, if that's the way he said it, he has directed, then that's a direct directive.
So it takes us back to that conversation.
Yes.
I mean, how lawful it is. You have said that if the end is justifiable, then we can perhaps, just decide how to go about it so that you make it. But the question properly. Is, so why do we have these laws? Why don't we follow them?
Well, it's a good question, but if you remember what I said governance, human affairs, human relations is not a precise science, that it must follow a certain form. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the independence of the central bank should be eroded. Not at all. I'm a lawyer, so I would never admit that or advocate such a position. However, people have different ways and different styles of doing things. Okay? There are those who give due credence to processes and make sure that processes are followed. There are some who said, I want to do, and then let the civil servants, let my aides, let everybody go and sort out how it's to be done. You know, so I want to believe that the process might not be the best way. However, let's not focus too much on that, because that process can be fine-tuned, it can be reversed, it can be done properly. Okay, this is what the president wants us to do. Let's look at it. And again, we haven't heard from the central bank. I wish they had come up with a statement and said, okay, they said the president has said stop, and we're going to stop from this moment. In fact, I'm not sure whether that statement has said when this is going to take effect. Is it immediately? Is it in 6 weeks' time? Is it in 8 months' time? Those are the things that we should be expecting the central bank itself to come up with. And then when we see that, then we know exactly which way we're going to go. He said just now, at the moment, we don't know what food items have been banned. Is it processed food? Is it raw materials? Is it confectionery? Those are details that need to come out. So when we know those details, then we have a clearer picture as to what needs to be
some
done.
of the materials out there, information out there, which some persons who spoke to different firms, they get the understanding that the CBN, the hierarchy there, think that, well, yes, we like this policy, we like the idea, we like the directive, whichever adjective they want to use, and they think that we can now implement this policy in phases.
Sure.
So they think that that's the way to go. So that suggests it's not wholesale.
Yes.
They will implement it in phases.
Well, that is an informal feedback.
Yes.
And what we are
official.
saying is that the CBN should now come, and first, the CBN should come out to confirm that, yes, we received this directive. And we also expect, because what we had said is not that the policy is bad, but what we are saying is that there should be caution with regards to implementation and timelines. We expect CBN now to come out and clarify, number one, what are those classes of food that are affected? Number two, what are the plans or stages of implementation? In other words, are you going to give a moratorium, say, of 5 years for companies or importers to do backward integration or get themselves ready for the eventual implementation? Number three, what support is government actually going to give to these importers with regards to creating an enabling environment for them to be able to do backward integration or to get substitutes? I'll give you one simple example that we can all connect with. Local production of food, one of the hindrances to self-sufficiency is this security issue. Just yesterday, we were discussing a Save Our Soul message that we received from somewhere in Oyo State of acres of farmlands that were raised by cattle. Massive and massive of investments destroyed. And what do? And that talks about security of investment. So what are we going to, because you cannot invest and provide guaranteed security for yourself, for your investment. That will be taking laws into your hands. You can provide measured security, but we have law enforcement agents. What assurance is government going to give that going forward, when you do massive investment to cut back on this importation, what assurance do you have that it will be secured? There are lots of issues to be resolved, but we've been speaking about ease of doing business, creating an enabling environment. What we are saying is that there are basic issues that government needs to address to give life to all these semantics.
But Mr. Olawale, one wonders, given the nature of our nation, we're a 200 million man population and all of that.
Yes.
If this policy kicks in today, hypothetically, how many people will be affected by this imported food, this ban on imported food?
You know,
Or what category of people
if every Nigerian will be affected one way or the other. You know, food is a physiological need, basic needs that is very essential for survival. That is the rudimentary starting point. In other words, it's going to, number one, affect consumption pattern of people. Number two, it's also going to affect the cost of purchase of this food. In other words, you have a situation where you are the cost of production of some of these processed foods. Now let's talk about processed food. The cost of production of processed food are going to be affected or impacted, and it's going to translate into consumer purchase pricing.
Because, you know, the question some people may want to ask is, look, how many Nigerians buy imported foods, you know, in the first place? You know, I mean, in the rural areas, they don't have access to many of the imported items. So that probably puts a question on the category of food that you talked about the other time.
Exactly, but it's not just imported food. That's just one aspect of it. I was coming even to the local foods that are grown, that everyone, including you and me, consumes. I was speaking about basic things that government needs to do before cutting back on a forex supply for food importation. And when we are talking of food importation, it's not just the processed food that comes in. Even the local food that's been produced. You discover that, I've mentioned the issue of security, even access to those farms, settlements, and evacuation of those foods to market is a very big issue. And it's talking about infrastructural development. Directly or indirectly, people will be impacted. And as we speak, and that also speaks to the issue of whether we are self-sufficient or not. As we speak, there are tons and tons of food harvest that are rotting away, even in the farms. They are located far away from the mainland. So that also speaks to what are those variables that are going to be taken care of before we implement.
So we have, so we have infrastructural deficiencies, you know, in terms of food processing and all of that. But some also say
food
that
production generally, not necessarily processing, even growing, and some issue of mechanization as well.
Some also argue that, I mean, you remember in the Obasanjo, I think in 2004, there about where some products were, you know, banned, so to speak.
Yes.
Some argue that, you know, a repeat of that could happen to provoke, you know, local alternatives as even much quicker than perhaps planned.
But even if you are going to provoke responses, you don't just do that at the detriment of people, at the detriment of investment, at the detriment of the capacity. Because we really don't have the capacity yet. But I think what is very fundamental is for us to sit down and identify what we need to do to show up our capacity.
Okay.
And we'll get there. It's not as if it's impossible.
Let me bring in Mr. Oyemi on one of the issues you raised previously, which has to do with security.
Yes. Yeah.
So even if the policy was well-timed, even if it came at the best of times and everything was in place for us to implement it,
Yes.
the issue he raised about security, it can, in the words, provoke a negative response.
Oh, yes.
What do we do about that?
Well, security is a matter that cuts across everything. Even I, as a lawyer, if I was traveling to another state to conduct a case or go for meetings and all that, and there's the issue of security. Do I want to travel? So it's not only in terms of agricultural production that the problem of security, it's a major problem in the country at this moment. And that has to be tackled one way or the other, and tackled in an efficient manner. What we have seen that's happening here now is a breakdown of almost everything in this country. It's a reflection. Security is at its lowest ebb. Education is at its lowest ebb. Manufacturing is at its lowest ebb. Power supply is at its lowest ebb. Infrastructure is deplorable. The roads are in a bad shape. So let's call a spade a spade. Almost everything in this country at the moment is deplorable, and that's putting it mildly. So we need to look at all of these issues and look at them with a definite and a determination to reverse the trend. Sometimes when this type of issues come up, for some people in a generational group, in my own generational group, for example, we've seen this country when it was in a better state. Yeah. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, that is as bad as it is now, became operational in 1978. And for many years thereafter, it was a bliss traveling to Ibadan. 40 minutes thereabout, toll gate to toll gate. Now 6 hours, 5 hours, you can't even determine. You tell somebody, I have a meeting in Ibadan. What time is our meeting? Well, our meeting is when I arrive. Mm-hmm. I will leave at 6 a.m. and I hope I'll be there in 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes I take 6 hours. So the security, and we've also heard about people being waylaid on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Not to look at the other, more the hinterland and Oyo State that he mentioned now. So there's no doubt about that there's a major problem across various sectors, almost all the sectors.
If I could bring this in,
yeah.
I know that the Southwest governors had a meeting recently. The Southeast governors have had similar meetings, and the Southwest governors, they particularly say they're going to launch, I think, a security outfit to handle some of these things. So they themselves, too, they're thinking about what to do to solve all of these things out. So shouldn't we take some sort of encouragement and be encouraged that, look, well, since they know about these matters, they're doing something about it, there should be some, who knows, light at the end of the tunnel.
Hopefully so.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah, go on, yes.
You know, in Nigeria now, because of failure in governance and repeated efforts at dealing with issues which had not actually yielded concrete results, and also the feeble attempts by government functionaries that are insincere in time past had made Nigerians approach most of these interventions or planned interventions with caution and a little bit of cynicism, because our response usually is, okay, wait until then. Because many a times, they mean well, but the problem with Nigeria is not the issue of policy or plans. It's with implementation.
Absolutely.
They go out there, they make fantastic statements, and they say the right things, but down the line, when you look back, after several months or year, as a matter of fact, even all they said they were going to do, there are no timelines. And Nigerians will have been comforted to say, okay, by the end of the year, by December, we'll have achieved this. That will make it measurable. By the first quarter of 2020, we'll have gone further to achieve this, and so on and so forth. So what they are thrown on the table is vague, it's not specific, it's not measurable. And that makes it a little bit difficult for Nigerians to really be extremely hopeful that, yes, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. All we can just do is to say, okay, we'll wait and see.
Okay, now that you talk about timeline briefly, now in a few months, in fact, by next year, we'll talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Yes. And we have obligations to that. On one hand, we're saying there will be a ban on Forex. By the way, not a ban on importation, but a ban on Forex for food importation. So we have that, and then we have our obligations for the AFTA. So how do we merge that briefly?
Well, you see, AFTA is looking at continental trade. We're trying to position ourselves like European Union. Because, for example, when you look at the European Union trading with other countries, it's the European Union as one body.
Okay, pardon me, so we'll go to break and come back and let you conclude your thoughts. I hope you don't lose your train of thought. Please join us again. All right, welcome back. Well, it's our concluding moments now on this food import policy. Is a directive? Okay, you were making a point before we went to break.
Yes, I was talking about the African Continental Free Trade Act.
Yeah.
And I said the essence of that is to create a large market in Africa where Africans can trade amongst ourselves. And then trading outside Africa, we're coming as a block. Because if we go and trade with other continents and other countries on a one-on-one, Nigeria goes, Ghana goes, Rwanda, and all those countries, sometimes we are disadvantaged. The EU goes at a block, so they're able to negotiate good terms. So the essence here is also for us to be able to negotiate as a block when we're trading outside Africa. And then within Africa itself, for us to take comparative advantage. Each country drop tariff, encourage free movement of goods and services and people across the continent, and then hopefully there'll be a boost in trade because your market, as a manufacturer here in Nigeria now, his market is not only Nigeria, his market is every other nation in Africa that needs his products. And if you reduce tariff, you remove customs, and there's free movement of goods and services, then it's intended to boost trade amongst African nations.
You know, when you
but
said...
let me just say something. But coming to Nigeria, we're touted as the biggest market in Africa. Sometimes there's a tussle between us and South Africa, but with our population and all that. But in terms of manufacturing capacity, do we really have it? Let's look at power alone. The cost of production in Nigeria is very high because of the power situation. Secondly, infrastructure. It's cheaper to move goods and services by rail than by road. At the moment, we're trying to build the rails. Let's hope we're able to do so. The roads are in a bad state, very high cost and all that. Would we have that advantage? In reality, it's the question for government and those in charge to make sure that, because if not, we'll just end up being a consuming nation again because we have the population to consume the goods and services provided by everybody else. But we must make sure that we're able to produce the goods and services at a competitive rate so that other nations will actually buy our goods and services. And that's the way Nigeria can benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Act. Otherwise, it will not work to our advantage.
One last question, and this is business, Mr. Olawale. Forest restriction of food import means that the businessman may have to go source his forex elsewhere.
Absolutely.
That's not, how good or bad is that?
Very bad. Because, like I said before, government meant well. But the question is access to fund or capital in Nigeria. The cost of those funds has been astronomically high and very, very uninspiring. And we have said repeatedly that, look, it's one thing for you to have policies and make policy statements, but with regards to the implementation, and this speaks to central bank now, with regards to its relationship, its regulatory relationship with the commercial banks. So it's also speaking to those basic things that we said we need to do for our business to be competitive. And that also latches or aligns with what he has said with regards to African Free Continental Trade Agreement. Our businesses, as it is today, are not competitive enough to withstand this global market. And that's why, overall, we have said, yes, we know the benefits inherent in the trade agreement, but there are lots of homework to be done to position our businesses to be competitive so that ultimately we'll be able to derive full benefit from the trade agreement. And it was on that basis that the organized private sector endorsed the signature, the endorsed government's plan to sign, with the understanding that government will come back home, engage, consult, and support businesses to be competitive.
So there's this general perception that, I mean, this happened in 2015. Remember the 41 products that were put on that list? And, you know, Nigerians are saying this will happen and we'll eventually get used to it and we'll forge ahead. I mean, that's on one hand. Now, some people are saying, no, we can't just learn on the job for this particular one. How about we build capacity? And I think you have said a lot about that. Let's build capacity before we move ahead in that light. And then you said something earlier. You said a businessman, for example, who wants to import will have to now get other means, and that is bad. But then what if the businessman says, you know what, let me just for this period shut my eyes and then look inwards? Wouldn't that work?
It's not as if we will not survive it or will not pull through. The 41 items that were excluded from Forex access came and we adjusted somehow, just like you said. However, it is the impact and the consequences on it for businesses. What happened? Life went on. I don't have the statistics now, but I can tell you that we had several businesses or business investors that divested on account of that. And there were many businesses that closed down on account of that. So life goes on, but what is the impact? The issue of loss of job, and that's one of the reasons, because when we don't think through all these policies before we implement, that's one of the reasons why our unemployment rate keeps skyrocketing. So what we are saying in conclusion is that we should think through it. We should exercise caution. We should do due diligence and ensure that every variable is taken on board before we launch into implementing such a policy.
All right, so that's where we have to let it go today. So we'll be looking to see what CBN eventually says at the end of the day. So policies and then investors can also know where they are headed. But I want to thank both of you. Mr. Timothy Olawale is DG of NECA, and Mr. Dapo Oyewumi is the CEO of Center for Law and Business. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay, but we'll go to Abuja, or to Markway first, so that we can just get another perspective on the goings-on in the polity. Well, she's going to be said soon, so you're going to see her now. Markway?